time great in standard Hearthstone. So, you know, shout out to RDU.
And that was the Miracle Priest, and this is going to be the matchup here. And Miracle Priest is, I'm a little bit disappointed to say, one of the decks I like a lot at the moment, and that scares me since it is still Priest, but it's a very unique style of Priest, and I just like it a lot because of the amount of choices you have to make, right? I think a lot of people might oversimplify this deck and just say, oh, you just play this and make a big dude. It's like, right, but there's so many different ways to go about that and so many different ways to recover bad games that it does feel like a pretty high skill cap deck, at least in my opinion.
I see you were making a bad point because you used the stupid person voice. Thank you for demonstrating.
Yeah, you have to work really hard to make it sound different from my normal voice.
I know, yeah. Not a big jump.
Yeah, well, I just made sure I didn't rhyme to just not throw you off, so.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Looking at the opening hands here, Nazmani, Bloodweaver in hand, and the Malagoose as well for RDU. And none of the actual like key cards you want to dive in, but how does Viper's hand look here, Sottle? Is this looking good for him going forward?
Flexible is the word, right? He does have this resizing pouch option, which he is going to leverage, but Fungal Fortune Solar, of course, gives him a lot of angles. This would have been a super interesting hand if he had gone not just the Arbor Up, lent further into the token system, because if he actually had like Glowfly Swarm in his deck, for example, pouch into a Bloom and then having Fungal Fortunes Bloom and potentially then drawing a Glowfly Swarm off the Fungal Fortunes could get him off to an incredibly fast start in that position. But I think now picking up Capture Coldtooth Mine, that is the best case scenario for Viper because he's going to get to turn those Blooms into potentially Kazakhstan treasures very, very shortly with the way this is panning out.
And I actually really like this play from RDU. This is something I was testing out quite a lot, and not just in Druid, but in a lot of matchups. That like, how safe is it to actually just play Nazmani on curve? And how often can you get away with it? Because if you do, you save so much mana, especially with the Gift of Luminance in hand for RDU. We'll have a one-cost spell as well, at absolute worst-case scenario. So there is a chance that you can actually pop off next turn, and there are actually very few ways this gets directly punished, right? Or very specific sets of cards that Viper would need.
Yeah, and they're all extremely expensive, right? Yeah. It's like Feral Rage, Bloom, Hero Power, or in this case, both of these are in hand. Solar Luna is an option that's available as well. But both of those are, you know, potentially catastrophically expensive for the Druid. But the thing is, what's catastrophically expensive for Druid also is just leaving this on board for a turn.
Yeah, I'm wondering, can actually like coin Solar Luna Fungal, right? Is that a turn he could make? Although all the reductions confuse me, but regardless, he goes with just the Luna, the Feral Rage, to clean this up. And again, it's a good gambit from RDU. Like I said, I do like the play just because it didn't work, didn't make it bad. But ooh, indeed, Raise Dead to just grab another one is a nice recovery, because without that, RDU needs to draw some insights, right, to really get this game going now.
Yeah, that hand was not looking promising at the time. But yeah, going back to Viper's turn, I think he did what was the most sensible way to deal with the card, just using Luna and Feral. Obviously, it's massive overkill. You're doing 7 damage to the 5 health minion, but the inefficiency of damage there, I think, is a lot better than the inefficiency of resources, where using a Solar to do something, using a Bloom to do something, those are much bigger misses, because now he's preserved both Blooms, he's preserved the Solar, and he's preserved the Fungal Fortunes, which means he can go straight into Kazakh's power deck if he really wants to. Obviously, we're in that position we talked about yesterday, where you're blooming out super early Kazakhs, so you don't get to do too many powerful things immediately. But we also talked a lot yesterday about the quality of your 5 or 6 card Druid hand when you play Kazakhstan really influencing that decision. Solar plus Fungal Fortunes, heck yeah, sign me up. Like, I want to draw some treasures and cast them twice in the near future.
Yeah, and the big deal as well is in this specific matchup, Priest does not actually run any real removal, right? So this would have to have been answered by a discovered Shadow Word Death, maybe wait till something comes down, there's a Hysteria played, but realistically, RDU very often cannot kill this, right? And it's just an 8/8. So it's one of the better ways or better times and matchups to do this sort of bloom Kaz, because there's just almost never an actual answer to this 8/8. And even if RDU pops off, he would have to pop off again this turn after playing a Bloodweaver last turn, or the turn before, should I say, and make it have more than 8 health, right? Which isn't super easy. It still requires some very specific things to happen.
This could be a potentially problematic pop-off attempt here for RDU. He is just going to leave it there with the Divine Shields in play. He's in that weird situation where with Power Word Fortitude in hand, if you don't use it early, then technically your Nazmani procs are only actually like netting even, right? Like you're discounting a spell in your hand, but then because you're playing a spell in your hand, the Fortitude is then also getting one more expensive every time that you do it. So it would have been very difficult to start a true chain off of this position. But I think just making the 2 Divine Shield minions does make a lot of sense here.
Yeah, because he knows how limited Viper's next turn. Yes, he has an 8/8, but he has a single 8/8 and a coin hero power or a coin another Luna, right? There are very limited options as to what's available to play. And that problem you mentioned about Fortitude is true. A little bit less with 2 Nazmanis on board, because that reduction is still wins, right?
Yeah, it's still slower than it would be without a Fortitude,
yes,
right?
Yeah, it's still a lot worse. Yeah, Viper looks like he is going to raid here, I imagine.
Oh,
that was a good draw.
Baby.
Do you like Nazmani, like Psyche split, and then...
I think he's... Yeah, I was...
slow playing it?
It's close between the 2 players there. You obviously have to get fortunate. If you play the other Nazmani, you really want discounts going to the right of your hand. Like any discount that hits Mali is kind of pointless at that point because you're never going to get it down to 0. So just making the 2 big Divine Shields here makes a lot of sense. And then you can also end this with Devour, right, to get the kill. It's just super clean to line things up. So I like this line.
I think the other line's better if any of the players were on less than 27 health, right? Because he would get a double reduction, then a triple reduction, then he does Devour for even further reductions, right? And then the Gift of the Naru could draw cards, but because it wouldn't actually draw any cards, then yeah, I think it's okay to just kind of go halfway and not go all in that turn.
We see the problem on Viper's side. I believe he turned down the first Embers he was offered and then picked it up on the second offering instead. But you see the problem with the early Bloom Kazakus is that is now miles away from being castable and, you know, essentially impossible to be played alongside the Solar Eclipse in this position, which is just immediately game-ending in a lot of spots. So he's stuck with a fairly awkward hand right now.
And also, as we can see in a bit of a weird way, even if the reductions went terrible, which I just don't even think they can, but if Boombots came down, RDU could keep, like, trade twice and hope some hit face, and then get card draw with Gift of the Naru, right? So he could potentially draw a lot if these Boombots were played anyway. So real tough one for Viper to deal with. There's the Jars. Oh, big draw.
Yeah, Wand is huge. I don't know. I think he was offered Hyper Blaster. I don't know if he picked up Hyper Blaster, but obviously Fungal into Hyper Blaster there would have been a pretty awesome turn for him to at least take care of half of this problem on the other side. But now having consolidated the Wand, he's going to find himself in a pretty good position here anyway.
Great hero power attack.
Probably going to be Mali time. What do you mean, not taking care of the Divine Shield, or?
No, just putting him to drawable range.
Oh, I see. Yeah, no, that is a good point.
I know I've already talked about it a lot, but if the priest is running out of cards, don't give them more.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can see that the Goose is going to have something to say about this anyway, so it's not really going to punish Viper too much, but it's still more card draw. Gave RDU some more options.
Yeah, weirdly, it just kind of created extra problems for RDU as he needed to discount other cards first before he could just jam his Mali and draw 9 cards.
Maybe it was just big brain.
I think that might be giving a little bit too much credit, but we'll see. Picks up the other Fortitude, which is perfect to keep this going. He could essentially play every card in his hand for 0 this turn, absolutely guaranteed with 3 Nazmanis on board.
Picks up double bless.
There, interesting. Okay.
I think he's just getting close to lethal, right?
Yeah, fair.
Like, he's got double bless in hand. Okay, that's a lot of minions. He's not got any more buff, but he still has Thrive as well.
15, 22. Yeah, I think with Infinite Time, that is guaranteed lethal.
Yeah.
He just ran out of time on the rope here because he could have kept going. Void Shard could have gone through.
Void Shard's 4. Yeah.
He gets Alexstrasza down to 0 as well. Alexstrasza goes face. Like, yeah, that's absolutely lethal, but it's timer lethal in a very timer-intensive deck, so I'm not going to rag on him too much. Yes, it sucks. Yes, you should hit that, but not the end of the world. He'll be fine.
And I will say, again, when I was practicing with this deck, the turns where you do a lot of discovers, it gets ridiculous, the amount of time it takes, right, to try and handle it, because the discovers slow down your animation, like general speed, so much. Even if you snap pick them, the animation still plays. So definitely a tough one there, but RDU managed it. He put himself in a good enough position that it simply didn't matter. And then, again, we saw the massive downside of actually getting a Kaz out early, even against Priest, right? RDU did have a good hand, and it did help him out a little bit. I think the kill on the first Bloodweaver was obviously good for Viper, but then raised dead into the other Bloodweaver left in deck right at the right time for RDU. I think without those things happening, he could have potentially fell behind very quickly.
Absolutely, yeah. That raised dead was absolutely monstrous, right? In order to allow him to pop off again, get that Mali cheap, left himself in a position where he was almost going to have guaranteed lethal with an 8 health minion sticking on the board, right? Mali down to, I think, 2 in the end and drawing a full deck of spells. Like, I don't know if it was even possible to miss Desperate Prayer and Fortitude from that position with the rest of his deck that he had, but that's what it would have required to stop popping off from that point. And then, yeah, very quickly recognizing at least that he was supposed to be going for damage with the Void Shard and the Alexstrasza, made the right choices, just ran out of time to execute, which, yeah, obviously we'd love to see players hit that when you're playing at the absolute high level. If you, for example, are playing for a spot in the World Championship, that might be the kind of thing that would be important to hit, but in that spot, not really particularly punishing.
Yeah, it looks like RDU is going to jump over to this Brute Demon Hunter now. Viper sticking to the Druid. But again, this Brute Demon Hunter, a deck I didn't really think about too much when the mini set came out. I wasn't really like, oh yeah, Brute Demon Hunter's making a comeback. And then it just has. And multiple players that have brought it have done very well with it recently. We've seen a lot of success from this deck. And yeah, it's a big surprise for me, but I'm not overly complaining. I do enjoy watching it played.
Minion on 1 from RDU. This is becoming more and more common with all varieties of Quest Demon Hunter these days. There used to be much more debate about which hands were right to Hero Power on 1, Illidari Studies on 1 in Quest Demon Hunter, for example. These days, there's so many decks, even just in straight up Fel Demon Hunter. Normally, most players value just getting that extra source of attack in with the Hero Power on turn 1 over getting that quest down and then just going Quest Hero Power on turn 2, having then already juiced the Kurtrus that extra little bit. But in this case, hey, tempo 1-3. Start hitting the Druid. Get Soul Fragments in your deck. Start juicing those Brutes.
Speaking of tempo, the Tiny Fin combo with the Arbor up now. I mean, it's just an extra minion as far as I can see, Sol. But yeah, unfortunately...
is this the new Shadow Priest? You just resizing pouch for a bunch of 0 drops and then give them Arbor up? Like...
Viper did not get the Bloom offered. There was a smirk as he was offered the 2-0, the 2 1-1s and the Pounce, unfortunately, from his pouch. So that was a bit of a shame. Going to slow down his plan a little bit.
It's since Pounce showed up, Pounce ruined everything. You know, like, when you're just hanging out with a group of friends, you're having a good time, like, you, Innovate, Bloom, Tiny Fin, and, what's the other one? What's the other 0 drop called? Imp, yes. They're all just hanging out, having a good time. It's great situation. Atmosphere is amazing. Jokes flying back and forth. And then your mate Pounce just comes along and ruins everything. You're like, oh, who invited Pounce? For God's sake. This dynamic was perfect until that guy showed up.
And to feel this story is about me, Sol. Just replace my name with Pounce in this story. That's what you want to say?
It's just me, Derek, Gia, TJ. We're all hanging out in the green room. We're having a great time. Oh, God, Raven's here. Jesus.
I was getting more and more nervous as that story continued and I saw where it was going. I feel familiar situation here.
Hey, at least you got mentioned. I didn't even say Lorinda's name.
I thought about Lorinda. That's something. It's the thought that counts, isn't it?
Indeed.
Here, though, Tiny Fin coming out to play. The huge threats from Viper. RDU. And not looking fantastic, but again, it is hard to say that when a glide exists in the hand. It's never a totally terrible hand with glide.
Yeah, he's got to make the decision here. Obviously, he drew a fragment this turn, so he's already on 2 discounts on the Brute, which might have incentivized him to go fishing with the cycling instead. But he's going to go with the glide, hopefully try and get a Brute back here as well, which he now can still do with this Crimson Sigil runner. Brute would currently cost 2, I believe now currently costing 1. Yeah! Oh, so close.
Ouch. All he can do is match the threat on board with a 1-1. Does have another glide though, and this one's going to be an outcast position, and I really hope we see Coin Arbor up here because it would just make me laugh. But I imagine Viper's going to just slow play this hero power and push. Without any other ramp, does he need to hold Coin?
It's a good question.
I mean, again, Arbor up wouldn't be terrible. It would put a decent amount of threat on board, but I'm just thinking if he Arbor up, and then that's all he's got for the foreseeable future, right? Which, is that enough, is my question.
I think I like it, honestly, just Coin Arbor up. Like, I feel like unless you're drawing Bloom off the top, or, Moonlit or Cold Tooth Mine into Bloom or something, which I suppose is a fair few outs when you actually break it down, the rest of your hand is just going to end up being too slow this game anyway. Like, by the time you get into that turn where you're playing Kazakhstan, your opponent's probably got 6 Brutes on the board already, so I think I'm down for the pressure, yeah, and Viper agrees.
I was trying to work out whether, with one, so many outs you were talking about, but also this versus Coin Scale into Solar Arbor, right, is another plan that could have happened, but arguably too slow.
I think so. Also, imagine planning long-term with the hand that you currently have when you're playing against Demon Hunter.
True. True. Okay, well, Viper's hand has dramatically improved with that glide.
It sure has, yeah. RDU is going to need his Brute turn fairly shortly, and with 3-mana Razorglaive Sentinel double jump already in hand, he's probably in pretty good position to be able to do that next turn. We could see a real power cycle turn coming out next turn.
Yeah, Viper looking good for his follow-up as well, though. We've got Goldtooth Mine again. We can fish the Kaz back out of the deck. Has Fungal Fortunes for even more value. Discovering another Moonlit. These are all the things you want to do as Druid.
They are. It's just whether they're happening too slowly to compete with RDU's quest completion right now. But again, a lot of this, I think, is going to hinge on the order of the deck for RDU on the next turn, right? How many uninterrupted draws he can find from potentially Razorglaive Sentinel, depending on what he draws off the top in terms of card draw, and then when and where those Brutes and Philosophies are positioned in his deck. Because, of course, if he draws a Philosophy before a Brute, he'll probably have to consider just jamming it to cycle it through with the Razorglaive Sentinel.
Well,
okay.
Double jump is going to help, because normally you wouldn't really want the Brute there, but the double jump is going to be absolutely huge, of course. There's Philosophy, there's Spectral, and you were talking about Order Soul. That just looked good to me.
All right, so Spectral draws 3, Brute is down to 2. Attack with the weapon, Brute is down to 1. Soul Fragments, Brute is down to 0. That's what he needed to do. He needed to get that Brute down to 0, because that now means he can spend the 1 mana he has remaining on that Philosophy and actually get the Brutes down here for double 0 if he really wants to. And he finds the outcasted one as well for the buff. That could not have gone any better.
Yep, seems reasonable to me. And again, it's something that's difficult to remember, but the I've even already forgot the name of the card. Where is it?
Razorglaive Sentinel?
Yes, Razorglaive Sentinel. It's a 5/4 as well, right? So if it sticks in a turn like this, it's a reasonable minion to push damage along with the brutes. So like, because at least I'm so used to seeing Demon Hunter just cycle, and then do something. You forget now that this Sentinel is a card that, yes, you use to cycle like RDU just did, but it's also a well-statted threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly when it was discounted in the first place and you only paid 3 mana for it. It's just a 3 mana 5/4 smacking your opponent. And this is what I mean, right? This is why I liked the idea of pressuring a little bit with that Arbor up. You know, firstly, using it while you have it because of the threat of Glide on the other side. And then secondly, because this would now be the turn where we'd be thinking about, you know, potentially Scale of Onyxia type stuff instead, right? And it's just, very underwhelming in response to what your opponent's just done to you.
That rope's burning again.
Viper deciding that he doesn't like what he's got at the moment. He needs to go fishing for something a little bit better. Gets hold of a Bloom, but of course he did just spend 3 mana to get there. Trying to think of pouch outs. I was going to go past 10 mana so he can get some of the big outcomes, right, from pouch next turn if he lives, which he should do here.
Brute again, Philosophy Outcast again. And then start cycling for the left if he wants to, but he is just going to go for the curve.
I like it.
And it looks like, yep, sure. 7/7 in play instead of probably 2 7/8s, but sets yourself up beautifully for the rest. And there is a best case scenario where all of the above happens, which RDU is actually marching towards quite rapidly at the moment.
Worth an equip?
Yeah, I think he's going to attack with this first and then draw the card, but that means he won't get the card draw of playing the Lion's Frenzy.
Yeah, I thought he was going to play the Lion's Frenzy first to maybe attack with the Lion's Frenzy, actually.
Yeah, true.
Because he's drew a lot of
cards.
Does
it work in that order, by the way, if you play the Lion's Frenzy and simultaneously destroy a Death Rattle that would put a different card on the right-hand side of your hand? Does that still count for Razorglaive as having played your rightmost card? I actually don't know that interaction. I
also don't know because I've not seen it, but I'd like to hope yes, because you played the card on the right.
Right. Play phase happens before Death Rattle phase, right? So technically it should, would be my reading of it.
So, yeah. Either way, look at this. Wow. It's a huge board of threats here from RDU. Viper, I mean, what can you even go for? You look at some of the stall potential of that you would normally look at in situations like this of, say, Solar and Best in Shell, but that versus this board is going to get laughed at.
Yogg time, isn't it?
I think so.
It's what it is. You have to count your spells here as well to make sure that you're in business. But if you are already, you can play, for example, like Bloom Solar Pouch this turn for 2 shots at Yogg and then hope that your Yogg wins you the game.
Or Deathwing.
Deathwing works too. Yeah, that's a good point.
Who needs a hand when you've got a 12/12?
Fair. Get the Luna in there as well. Again, it just depends on how many spells Viper has cast, how many he needs to cast to get up to that 10 threshold for the Yogg, but he needs to go. The rope is about to appear. There it is.
And I think at this point, just play as much as you can, right? He's just going to go for it straight, going to go for the Raid Boss Onyxia, but I don't think that's enough.
He has a Luna to go with it. I confess I didn't actually see what the other options were on this one. He can kill the other brute with the rest of the whelps, and then even like Bloom Luna would not be enough to clear this up. Yeah, Viper just not getting there.
It was one
of decision. Felt like a bit of decision paralysis at the end there as the rope appeared, and then ended up just going for the single pouch, picking up the Onyxia, but Onyxia was never going to be enough.
It was one of the reasons when I mentioned Deathwing, I was sat obviously thinking of the 10 drops that would make him not instantly die, and very quickly decided that Raid Boss was not one, because yeah, you get the free 8 damage trade, which is great on that board because it just kills a brute, but the 2 attack then don't add up because there's too many brutes. There was still Kurtrus, there was still the Sentinel on board that we talked about, which would take 2 more whelps to kill as a 5/4, so there was just too much, and then you add that obviously to what we could see in RDU's hand, and it just wasn't to be. I think Viper did have to maybe try and like double up on things and try and really go for just multiple threats, or just I don't know, maybe start off the digging a little bit earlier to give him more time to think. But it was definitely a tough matchup there. RDU got the brutes down nice and early, and of course we could see the Lion's Frenzy with card draw to back up anyway. And that sort of means RDU is off to a very swift 2-0 with just Weapon Rogue left.
Just Weapon Rogue left indeed. Yeah, this is Sinister Strike Wicked Stab version of the deck as opposed to Pirates and Shadow Step, using that Mr. Scabs for charge damage. Mr. Smite for charge damage. I was staring at, of course, Shadowcrafter Scabs as I was saying that, because one or two rogues, despite Scabs coming out and being one of the highest power level cards in the whole set and then receiving a nerf, and then people just still saying, yep, card's still nuts. There have been one or two different builds of Rogue that we've seen in Grandmasters, and I believe one or two in the Masters Tour as well, that are omitting Scabs from decks that you would normally see them in to make room for a few other tech cards in there here and there. But no such thing for RDU, and I think particularly no such thing for Weapon Rogue, where cloak Scabs while repeatedly hitting your opponent in the face is just such a core game plan to the way the game works that I think it is a very important inclusion.
Yeah, let's just simplify this. Cloak was nerfed. Scabs was nerfed.
Yeah.
They're all still played because it's insane to just not be targetable is such a big deal against most decks that they simply just don't have a way to kill you. Very similar to the old, obviously, Timeout Paladin from back in the day. One of my favorite decks ever, actually. So we'll see how it pans out now, though. How does this matchup feel for you, Sottle, with the Weapon Rogue versus the Druid, outside of the basics of Rogue wants a weapon? Like, just the matchup in general.
It's felt pretty good for me for Druid so far, it has to be said, because there's so much flexibility in things that you can do. If you're playing the version of the deck that has Armor and Kazakhstan, you have obviously the ability to go Feral Rage, Moontouch Amulet, gain 1,000,000, buy yourself a bunch of time, essentially outlast the cloaks and scabs that your opponent has to be able to resist you, because that's really their only defensive mechanisms against stuff that Druid does. They can't actually clear Druid boards. It's not possible. The mechanics is just not there in the deck. So if you can get up to 40, 50, 60 health and just survive the turns where they're using cloaks and scabs to stay alive, then it's very difficult for them to continue to resist after that point. But there's also so much flexibility in the generated stuff, with stuff like Best in Shell, with the Anoyo board coming off Kazakhstan treasures, for example, all this kind of stuff that just makes you essentially unkillable to Rogue in a lot of positions, that I think Druid finds a lot of game in this spot.
Well, let's see how it goes so far. Already an early pull of Guff there from Viper, which means he's got a plan set, locked, loaded, ready to go with the double bloom. And if you thought Druid did all right against Rogue in general, well, it's looking even better now, because Guff's just so powerful because it dodges the drawbacks of a lot of early bloom plays, right? It's like, oh, you used to, or you still do, depending on blooming out. You spend so many cards doing the big play that you've got nothing in hand to follow up with necessarily. Whereas Guff draws, ramps, does everything. Simple. If you can play it, you should play it.
All right, Viper getting serious now. This was a glasses not required situation up until then, but then RDU drew the shank. And I was like, all right, okay, I guess I actually need to focus.
+1 to focus, glasses.
God damn it, Raven, why do you always keep showing up like this? No one wants you here. Me, Murloc, Tidyfin, and Deskin for hanging out, having a good time. Unbelievable.
What's worse is Pounce just is the worst one. If you compared me to a Tiny Fin, I'd be like, well, everyone likes that card, it's cute. Deskin, a bit mischievous, Pounce does nothing. 2 damage and then goes away. It's not a cool card. Yeah, I'm sorry. But Viper, going for the big tempo plays. Will RDU respect it and trade?
Silverleaf Poison coming down, of course. Activating that Swindle. He wants to really start stacking the damage poisons on this shank as soon as possible. Murderer!
Gotta play around Arbor.
There you go. George C was right all along.
Yep. There were still whispers of George C roaming the halls of Classic.
Is there anyone in Hearthstone that was like, top level for in the public consciousness for such a short time, but had as big an impact on stuff we still talk about as George C?
There are some great stories as well. Some of which I there's some of which I literally cannot tell on broadcast. And you're interested? Message me. Here though, RDU does have to face off against the best in shell, which is a bit of a problem, but that is a huge weapon. Not get any smaller anytime soon.
That is a filthy passage.
What?
The only slightly uncomfortable part is that the weapon only goes up to 6 attack, right? Whereas ideally he would love it to go to 7 here, and then everything would be perfect.
Yeah, to the extent where I'm wondering, does he just not play the Wicked Stab?
I guess, yeah.
You know what I mean? Just leave it in the deck, because it might do more. Now he gets another poison. I like this ordering a lot. It gives RDU the most options. And like shuffling a Wicked Stab back if it wasn't really going to change the amount of minions you kill anyway, I think is just a good plan, right? You can pull Wicked Stab later on, push extra damage with it.
Yeah, that's fair. The sequencing was absolutely on point because you might as well see the options off the draw before you get there. And then he did find a better prep target with the other Silverleaf. I think if you hadn't found a better prep target, I still would have prepped out the Wicked Stab and just thrown it somewhere, whether it was face or at the minion.
Sure.
Debate about at that point. Just for the sake of, thinking out your deck, finding more cloaks, finding all the stuff that you need to end the game. But the sequencing there was very important for RDU because he ended up finding a better option in the end, and that is why you draw your cards first.
The scale of Onyxia as well, so RDU does have to at least be worried about the potential Arbor up again. It's doing the job, Sol. I'm going to start putting Arbor up in my decks. The only problem being on ladder, no one knows what I'm playing, so they won't play around it. It would therefore completely defeat the point.
Yes, but all your friends down in 10K Legend will get to know your deck list.
10K, come on. Come on, don't exaggerate.
Sorry, 5K Legend, my bad.
I would have preferred 9. It's like, no, just not quite that extra digit.
That
Best passage I've ever seen.
It's a much less filthy passage, it has to be said, yeah. This one is sparkling clean.
Time is almost up.
All right.
It's
Worked out reasonably in the end, yeah. Again, gets another draw here, so he does still have prep potential. Okay. Yep, get it done. Love to see it. Dumping those cards, because he knows he's going to need cloaks soon, right? He doesn't have any cloaks back in his natural hand, so thinning out as many cards as possible from those passages is really, really important here. Oh, I misspoke. There was a cloak right at the end there.
Yeah, it always surprises me. I don't know why, because this has been the case for a long time, but how fast Weapon Rogue draws through its deck. I never think it's going to be that fast, but it always is. And we were talking about the threat of Arbor up here from Viper. Obviously, we can see it's not there, which problem for him. He does have Moon Touched Amulet, does have Best in Shell if he wants to just summon a taunt. Which at this point, do you think summoning one taunt here is actually better than cycling it? I think so.
It's such a problem, right? Because from this point, RDU has 4 cards left in his deck, so he's just going to start cloaking at this point, which means you're never really going to get the value of double taunt anyway. You'd need, like, Luna to shoot one of your own minions to then make space for the turtles to come down, right? Because RDU's not killing this stuff for you anymore. Even if you Arbor up at this point, he's not going to do it for you. He's just going to cloak and ignore it all.
Yeah. Viper seemed upset with that Discover. What was he fishing for? Armor, do you think?
Armor or Arbor, potentially.
It was only a matter of time.
Solar Eclipse potentially as well can be a big deal, right? Because it can double up on the armor, but if he gets hold of Solar Arbor up, then he just straight up wins the game in this position. So there was a lot of good hits there. Just didn't really find any of them in that spot.
This is the ultimate frustration when playing against Weapon Rogue is, even if, at this point, if you showed someone this screenshot for a second, you'd be like, oh, the Druid's going to win. And then you're like, no cloaks have been played, neither have scabs. You'd be like, oh, never mind. Because there's just nothing you can do about it, right? It's such a difficult thing to stop because the Rogue draws so fast. You know they have access to cloaks.
There's also just a ton of damage left remaining, especially since RDU's at the bottom of the deck with the Garrots in hand as well. There's just like 1 million damage, double Silverleaf on this weapon as well. Not quite enough mana, I think, to be able to get all that Guild Trader value in there as well.
Yeah, I think the second he didn't start Guild Trader, he was never going to try and like go for something, right? There's not quite enough damage there. But again, he's got Cloak, so it's fine. Like,
Yep.
You can wait. It's just how straightforward the card is. Just doesn't matter. Now Viper, I imagine, is going to at least consider Solar Feral here, right? He knows with RDU having, well, Will having no 0 cards in the deck, he knows there's a Garrote combo coming his way one way or the other.
Yeah, cannot see a world where Solar Feral does not happen here. Would leave him with 4 mana remaining, which is very frustrating because...
You can just innovate Arbor, right?
Could innovate Arbor, but I think you'd like to get the Best in Shell down as well, at the very least, to stop the weapon swing going face as well, potentially for 1 turn. I suppose your opponent would just play Scabs in that position anyway, and then just swing face with the weapon, so it's not that big of a deal. There's the Luna that he's needed to clear that space.
But to get it, he had to trade away the Best in Shell.
Yeah.
It's also really tricky as well, because I believe Viper's last Moonlit, he ended up getting Fungal, which, yes, you know, he wanted the card draw, I get it. But I think he was offered Guff as well, which might not sound like a lot, but it's potentially more armor. And I'm not saying he can ever out-armor the weapon, which I guess in a technical sense he could at one point. But, you know, it might buy any extra armor might buy you 1 more turn, right? And if 1 more turn means them using a stealth option, then maybe that helps enough. But it looks like it's just not going to be enough, right? This is just Omega damage.
Yep, way too much with the amount of damage that's coming through here. Garrot's coming off the top, all 4 of them, plus the 8 damage swing. Each one of these coming out, dealing 4 of them to come out. 16 is greater than 7 where I come from, Raven, and that is going to be a smooth as you like it 3-0 victory in the series for RDU.
Yeah, what feels like a bit of a rarity in this current format, at least based off Masters Tour and GM so far. I know, I think there was some quick games over in APAC this morning, but in general, I feel like we've been seeing a lot of, 3-2s across the board, which, Conquest kind of leads to as well. But just, I feel like we've not seen many just sweeps, right, in this meta at the moment. But it was a really good run there from RDU, and yet again, I think a lot of eyes have to be drawn to what our next match, not our next match, sorry, our third match is going to be of the day, because Blythe is running such an almost identical lineup that we've just seen from RDU, that suddenly we're starting to see, oh, well, this lineup, not this deck, but this lineup is just getting further and further in this first week of Grandmasters, and that's something to definitely keep an eye on, because I still think all the players are chasing that go-to, this is the strong lineup.
Yeah, it's certainly making its case for being just that. But RDU also making the case for just being the go-to strong player, Raven. Like, regardless of format, RDU always just seems to show up. You cannot keep this man down. He goes marching through to the semi-final number 1, where he will be waiting for the winner of Super Fake and Yala, which either way, either victory, either lineup, either player that he ends up facing is going to be presenting him with a very different challenge than what he just had with Viper's lineup.
Yeah, RDU looking pretty fantastic. Even, of course, the goal is always win the week, gain the points, right? But just already making it to that top 4 makes it so much less pressure going into the next few weeks. You're banking so many more points than the other players, the players who either didn't make it to stream or got knocked out yesterday.